Miles Davis secretly brought Carlos Santana on stage in Tokyo. Their spontaneous jam created music history. It was March 1975 at the legendary Nippon Budokan, and Miles was midway through his electric fusion set when he walked to the microphone and said simply, "I have a friend backstage who'd like to join us." The 12,000 Japanese fans had no idea what was about to happen. When Carlos Santana walked out with his guitar, the arena erupted in disbelief. What followed wasn't planned, wasn't rehearsed, wasn't even discussed beforehand. It was pure musical telepathy between two legends that created a 30-minute fusion masterpiece that would be bootlegged, studied, and revered for decades. The spontaneous collaboration proved that when true masters meet, magic doesn't need preparation, it just needs permission to happen. It was March 15, 1975, and Tokyo was experiencing a musical renaissance that would reshape Japanese culture's relationship with American music. The Nippon Budokan, originally built for martial arts competitions during the 1964 Olympics, had become one of the most prestigious concert venues in Asia. Miles Davis was performing there as part of his groundbreaking tour that was introducing Asian audiences to the electric fusion revolution that was transforming jazz. The Japan that Miles encountered in 1975 was a country in cultural transition. The economic boom of the 1960s had created a generation of young Japanese music fans who were hungry for authentic American musical experiences, but they were also sophisticated listeners who could distinguish between genuine artistic innovation and mere commercial exploitation. Miles knew that Japanese audiences were among the most knowledgeable and appreciative in the world, and he was determined to give them something special. What Miles didn't tell his band, his management, or anyone else was that he had been planning something extraordinary for the Tokyo show. 2 weeks earlier, while both musicians were recording in Los Angeles, Miles had run into Carlos Santana at a late-night session at Village Recorders. They had been mutual admirers for years but had never collaborated publicly. Miles had always respected Carlos's ability to blend spiritual intensity with musical sophistication. Santana's approach to guitar was something Miles found fascinating. The way Carlos could channel Latin rhythms, rock energy, and spiritual transcendence into a single guitar line. It reminded Miles of his own approach to trumpet innovation, constantly seeking new ways to express complex emotions through instrumental mastery. Carlos, for his part, had been influenced by Miles's fearless approach to musical evolution. While other jazz musicians criticized Miles for embracing electric instruments and rock rhythms, Carlos understood that Miles was doing what all great artists do, refusing to be imprisoned by other people's definitions of what their music should sound like. During that late-night conversation in Los Angeles, Miles had mentioned his upcoming Tokyo dates. "You ever been to Japan?" Miles asked. "Not yet," Carlos replied. "But I'd love to. I hear the audiences there really listen." Miles smiled. "They do. Better than anywhere else sometimes. You should come." "To Japan?" "To my show. March 15th, Budokan. Just come backstage. Bring your guitar." Carlos thought Miles was joking until he received a call 3 days before the concert. Miles's road manager explaining that Mr. Davis had requested Carlos's presence at the Tokyo show and that all travel arrangements had been made. "What am I supposed to do there?" Carlos asked. "Mr. Davis said you'll know when the time comes," the road manager replied. "Just bring your guitar and be ready." Carlos arrived in Tokyo on March 14th, the day before Miles's concert. He checked into the same hotel as Miles's band but was instructed to keep his presence secret. Even Miles's band members didn't know Carlos was in the city. The afternoon of the concert, Miles and Carlos met privately in Miles's hotel room. They didn't rehearse or discuss what they might play. Instead, they talked about music philosophy, about the spiritual aspects of improvisation, about the challenge of staying authentic while constantly evolving artistically. "Music is conversation," Miles said. "When two people who understand the language get together, they don't need to plan what they're going to say. They just need to listen and respond." Carlos nodded. "Like prayer. You don't rehearse prayer, you just open yourself up and let it flow." That evening, as 12,000 Japanese fans filled the Nippon Budokan, Carlos Santana sat quietly backstage, tuning his guitar and preparing for something he'd never experienced before, a completely spontaneous musical collaboration with one of his heroes, in front of an audience that had no idea what was about to happen. Miles took the stage at 8 p.m. with his electric fusion band, keyboardist Joe Zawinul, bassist Michael Henderson, drummer Al Foster, and guitarist Pete Cozy. The set list included material from Get Up With It and On the Corner, showcasing the dense, rhythmic, electronically enhanced sound that was pushing jazz into completely new territory. For the first hour, Miles played his regular set, and the audience was completely absorbed. Japanese audiences were legendary for their attention and respect, and the Budokan was filled with the kind of focused listening energy that musicians dream about. Every note was heard, every rhythmic nuance appreciated. During the second set, after finishing an extended version of If, Miles walked to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, all focused intently on the stage, and made a decision that would create one of the most legendary moments in fusion music history. "I have a friend backstage," Miles said simply, "who'd like to join us for a few songs." The audience politely applauded, expecting perhaps another jazz musician or a special guest from the Japanese music scene. They had no preparation for what happened next. Carlos Santana walked onto the Budokan stage carrying his Gibson SG guitar, and the arena exploded. The polite Japanese audience erupted in a way that shocked even Miles. 12,000 people were on their feet, screaming, applauding, and expressing disbelief. The combination of Miles Davis and Carlos Santana on one stage was something no one had imagined possible. Miles walked over to Carlos and, without saying a word, nodded toward the band. No discussion, no key signature, no song selection, just a nod that said, "Let's make music." What happened next was 30 minutes of spontaneous musical creation that would influence fusion music for decades. Miles began with a simple trumpet line, a modal phrase that hung in the air like a question. Carlos responded with a guitar melody that answered Miles's question while asking one of his own. The rhythm section, not knowing what was planned because nothing had been planned, followed their instincts, creating a groove that supported both musicians while giving them space to explore. Joe Zawinul's keyboards provided harmonic foundation, Michael Henderson's bass created rhythmic momentum, and Al Foster's drums offered rhythmic conversation. But the real magic was happening between Miles and Carlos. They had never played together before, but they were communicating musically with an intuition that seemed telepathic. When Miles played a phrase with Latin influences, Carlos would respond with jazz-influenced runs. When Carlos ventured into rock territory, Miles would find the jazz implications and develop them. The music moved through multiple phases. It began with modal jazz exploration, moved into Latin rock territory, ventured into electronic fusion, and finally evolved into something that had never existed before. A musical language that was simultaneously jazz, rock, Latin, electronic, spiritual, and completely original. The Japanese audience was witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a guest appearance or a jam session. This was the real-time creation of a new form of musical expression. For 30 minutes, two masters were having a musical conversation that was creating new possibilities for what fusion music could become. About 20 minutes into the improvisation, something extraordinary happened. Carlos began playing a melody that seemed to echo traditional Japanese musical scales, but filtered through his Latin rock sensibility. Miles immediately heard the cultural bridge Carlos was building and began responding with trumpet lines that incorporated both jazz sophistication and Eastern musical philosophy. The result was a musical fusion that was not just stylistic but cultural, East meeting West, ancient meeting modern, traditional meeting innovative. The Japanese audience recognized what was happening and responded with an emotional intensity that was unusual even for Budokan. The spontaneous collaboration reached its climax when Miles and Carlos began trading solos, but not in the traditional jazz sense. Instead of taking turns, they were creating interwoven melodic lines that seemed to spiral around each other, creating harmonies and rhythmic patterns that neither musician could have produced alone. For the final 10 minutes, the entire band joined in what could only be described as collective improvisation. All 6 musicians were creating music together without any predetermined structure. Yet the result was coherent, emotionally powerful, and musically sophisticated. It was improvisation at its highest level, multiple creative minds working together to create something that was greater than the sum of its parts. When the music finally ended, the Budokan was silent for almost 30 seconds. 12,000 people sat in stunned appreciation of what they had just experienced. Then the applause began, and it continued for over 15 minutes. People were crying, shouting, standing on their seats. The ovation felt less like appreciation for a performance and more like gratitude for having witnessed something that would never happen again in exactly the same way. Miles and Carlos embraced on stage, both knowing that they had just experienced something special. No words were necessary. The music had said everything. The bootleg recordings of that night began circulating within days. Someone in the audience had recorded the entire 30-minute collaboration, and that recording became one of the most treasured bootlegs in fusion music history. The sound quality was rough, but it captured something that no studio recording could ever reproduce: the spontaneous creation of new musical territory by two masters working without a net. Musicians around the world began studying those bootleg recordings, trying to understand how Miles and Carlos had achieved such musical telepathy. Jazz schools analyzed the harmonic progressions, rock musicians studied the guitar techniques, and fusion bands tried to recreate the energy and spontaneity. But what made that Tokyo collaboration legendary wasn't just the music. It was the demonstration of what becomes possible when artists trust each other completely. Miles had invited Carlos to join him without any preparation, and Carlos had accepted without knowing what would be expected of him. Both musicians had been willing to risk failure in front of 12,000 people for the possibility of creating something extraordinary. The influence of that night extended far beyond the music itself. The spontaneous collaboration inspired a generation of musicians to explore cross-cultural and cross-genre partnerships. It demonstrated that the most powerful musical moments often happen when artists abandon safety and embrace the unknown. Years later, when music journalists asked Carlos about that night, he would always emphasize the trust factor. "Miles didn't tell me what to play or how to play it. He just invited me to join a musical conversation. That kind of trust is rare in music, and when it happens, magic becomes possible." Miles characteristically was more succinct in his assessment. Good music doesn't need planning, it just needs musicians who know how to listen. The Tokyo collaboration also demonstrated something important about international musical exchange. In front of a Japanese audience, two American musicians, one African American, one Mexican American, had created music that incorporated Eastern musical philosophy and traditional Japanese aesthetic principles. The result wasn't cultural appropriation, but cultural conversation, a respectful exchange that enriched all participants. The Nippon Budokan still commemorates that night with a small plaque backstage that reads, "March 15, 1975, Miles Davis and Carlos Santana. When masters meet, magic happens." Musicians who perform at the venue often ask about the story behind the plaque, and many have said that knowing about that legendary collaboration has inspired their own willingness to take musical risks. The legacy of that spontaneous 30-minute jam extends beyond fusion music into the broader understanding of what becomes possible when artists trust their instincts, respect their collaborators, and remain open to musical surprises. It proved that the most memorable moments in music often happen when artists stop trying to control the outcome and instead commit themselves completely to the creative process. If this story of spontaneous collaboration, musical trust, and the magic that happens when masters meet moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand that the greatest music often comes from the greatest risks. Have you ever experienced a moment of unexpected creative collaboration that produced something extraordinary? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to check out more stories about the legendary moments when music transcended all boundaries.